E. I should have known. There are moments in life when you think you've figured it out, that you've reached some kind of clarity, only to find yourself standing on the edge of something much darker than you ever imagined. My life wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to feel so torn. But somehow, in the middle of a separation that I thought would bring me peace, I found myself trapped in the chaos of him. I never planned for it. No one ever plans to fall into a situation like this. But somehow he appeared at the exact moment I needed him the least. It started innocently enough, just a few texts to pass the time, to distract myself from the silence that had been hanging over me since my husband and I decided to take a break. I wasn't looking for anyone else, I told myself that. But even then, something about him, something about the way he listened, the way he made me laugh when everything else felt heavy, made me feel like I could breathe again. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be part of this messy, complicated life I was trying to sort out. But one night, that all changed. You see, when you're in the middle of a separation, you expect space. You expect time to think things through, time to breathe. But what you don't expect is for your world to be turned upside down by someone who makes you feel alive in a way you haven't felt in years. Someone who isn't the one you should want, but someone you can't seem to stop thinking about. So there I was, alone, vulnerable, restless, and then, out of nowhere, he showed up. It was a quiet evening when he knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting him, of course, but something in my gut told me I couldn't send him away. Not that night. When I opened the door, there he was, the other man. My heart pounded in my chest. My pulse quickened. How had he even known where I lived? And why did it feel like the universe had conspired to bring him here at that exact moment? "Hey," he said, his voice low, smooth, as if he had every right to be standing in my doorway. I froze for a second, unsure of what to say, how to react. My separation was supposed to be about figuring things out, not falling into another entangled mess of emotions. But there he was, his eyes locking onto mine, like he was daring me to stop him from stepping inside. "Can we talk?" His question hung in the air, charged with an intensity that made me shiver. What was I supposed to do? Tell him to leave? Pretend like I wasn't desperate for connection? Pretend that I hadn't been craving the very thing he offered me? Attention for so long? I didn't want to admit it, but in that moment I wanted him more than I had ever wanted anything. I stepped aside, and he walked in. The weight of his presence filled the room, filling the empty spaces in my heart I hadn't realized were there. "I didn't mean to just show up like this," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. There was a sincerity in his tone, but something else too, a darkness, a desire that made my stomach tighten. "No, I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I didn't expect you to come, but I couldn't stay away." He took another step toward me, and in that moment, everything else faded into the background. The separation, the guilt, the confusion, the fear of making the wrong choice, what was happening to me. He was close now, standing so near that I could feel the heat of his body radiating against mine. It was like a magnetic pull, one I couldn't escape. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice a whisper now. "I know you're not looking for something right now, but I think you need someone who understands, someone who can make you feel alive again." His words wrapped around me like a promise of escape, of something new and exciting, something my heart hadn't felt in so long. My body betrayed me before I could even stop it, before I could stop myself from crossing that invisible line between what was right and what was just tempting. I knew I should resist. I knew I should push him away and walk away from the mess of emotions that threatened to drown me. But the longer he stood there, the harder it became to do anything but fall into him. He leaned in, just inches away, and I could feel his breath on my skin. I can't promise you anything, he said softly, his lips barely brushing my ear. But I can promise you this. For tonight, I can make you forget about everything else. And in that moment, I wanted to forget. I wanted to forget the guilt, the confusion, the man who had left me broken, the life I was supposed to be putting together again. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his. The kiss was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just physical, it was raw, it was desperate. It was everything I had been craving, but didn't want to admit. He didn't hold back. Neither of us did. It was as if the world outside had disappeared, and all that was left was the heat of his touch, the fire in his eyes. But nothing stays hidden forever, does it? The next morning, the reality of what had happened hit me harder than I ever imagined. I couldn't believe I'd let him in. Let him in like that, especially with everything I was trying to work through. I had crossed a line I never thought I would cross. The guilt was unbearable. It was a weight I couldn't shake, and yet, there was a part of me that didn't regret it. I had never felt more alive, more wanted, than in those moments with him. But now what? What did this mean? Where was this going? He left that morning without a word, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget the way he made me feel, the way his touch burned into my skin, and I couldn't help but wonder. What now? The air between us was thick with anticipation, with a kind of undeniable need that neither of us could ignore anymore. His lips were on mine again, his kiss deeper this time, more urgent. My thoughts were muddled, as if my body had taken control of everything I was feeling. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was playing a role. There was no separation between my desires and the reality of what was happening. His hands were everywhere, pulling me closer, exploring the curves of my body as if he was trying to memorize every inch of me. I could feel the heat radiating from him, his body against mine like it belonged there. It felt so real, so right. It was as if the world outside this room didn't exist anymore. There was only him and me, our bodies, our desires, and the dangerous path we were treading. I pulled away just long enough to catch my breath. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, my heart hammering in my chest. The overwhelming tension between us was almost suffocating. I needed a moment to think, but the pull to him was so strong that I couldn't make myself step back. "Are you sure?" I asked again, though I knew the answer. His eyes darkened, the hunger in them almost palpable. "I've never been more sure of anything," he whispered, his voice raw with desire. That was it. I couldn't fight it anymore. The guilt that had been weighing on me for days suddenly didn't matter. My body was aching for him in a way I couldn't explain, and I found myself pulled back into him, kissing him with an intensity I hadn't felt in so long. The line between right and wrong had become irrelevant. There was no turning back now. Every part of me screamed to just go with it, to surrender to the wild, dangerous thing we had started. And that's exactly what I did. Later, as we lay tangled together in the aftermath of what had just happened, I felt a mixture of emotions. The satisfaction of giving in, of finally feeling alive again, washed over me. But underneath it, I could feel a deep sense of dread slowly creeping in. What had I done? The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what this meant. Was I ready to end my marriage? Was this affair the answer? Or had I just made a mistake that would haunt me forever? "I shouldn't have done that," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. He reached for me, his fingers brushing my hair back from my face. "You don't have to explain," he said softly. "What happened between us was real. We both know that." I nodded, though doubt lingered in the pit of my stomach. It had felt real, but that didn't mean it was the right thing to do. I wasn't sure what this meant for me, for him, for my marriage. All I knew was that I couldn't deny what had just happened. "I'm not asking for anything from you," he continued, his voice steady. "I'm just here. And I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." There it was again. His calm assurance, his certainty that this was more than just a fleeting moment. He wasn't looking for a one-night thing. He was looking for something deeper, something that felt too complicated for me to understand at that moment. I wasn't ready for that. "I don't know what I want," I confessed. "I'm not even sure who I am right now." He didn't push. He simply held me closer, his arms wrapping around me protectively. "It's okay," he said. "Take your time. But just know that when you figure it out, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." The next few days were a blur. My mind was consumed with the memory of him, of us, and the mess I had created. Every time I looked at my husband, a wave of guilt washed over me. But there was something else too, a spark of something that I couldn't ignore. The separation had given me a glimpse into who I was without him, without the constraints of the life we had built together. But it had also shown me something I hadn't expected, the way I felt when I was with the other man. When I allowed myself to feel desired again, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about us. The texts kept coming, short messages, simple check-ins. But with everyone, I felt that pull toward him. I had told myself that it was just an affair, a fleeting moment of passion. But what if it wasn't? What if it was something more than that? What if I was falling for him? I wanted to tell myself that I was just confused, that this was just a product of my marriage falling apart. But the truth was harder to deny. There was something about him, about the way he made me feel, that I couldn't shake. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed again. It was him. "I miss you," the message read. The simplicity of the words sent a chill down my spine. I had been holding myself back, trying to resist the pull, trying to convince myself that I wasn't ready for what this could mean. But the truth was that I had been waiting for this moment. I had been waiting for him to reach out, for him to tell me what I had already known in my heart. I had missed him too. Before I could second-guess myself, I grabbed my keys, my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed out the door. I didn't know what was going to happen when I got to him, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't deny it any longer. I couldn't stay away. When I arrived at his place, the door opened almost immediately. He was standing there looking at me with that same intensity, that same hunger that had drawn me in from the very first moment. No words were needed. I stepped inside, and the moment the door closed behind me, he kissed me. It was a kiss filled with urgency, as if we both knew we were at a crossroads. There was no turning back from here. No more pretending. I pulled away for a moment, my breath shaky, my mind spinning. "What are we doing?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He didn't hesitate. "Whatever we want," he said, his voice low and confident. That was it. I didn't need any more explanations. I didn't need any more doubts. In that moment, I knew I was all in. All the questions, all the fears, melted away. There was only him and me.